Thank you, Juris. And thank all the distinguished guests for the introduction to the conference. So let's get down to business. But before getting down to business, I would be happy to announce a few things that may be important for the engagement of the audience and the conference viewers in some interactive activities. So first of all, I would like to note that there will be possibility to ask your questions on the Slido application. The password for logging into the conference is WindWorks, all small letters. The conference is going to have 4 panels. We will definitely cover all the most important issues that for the wind energy industry currently. Although we are going to have global touch as well, of course we are focusing on the Latvia situation individually and in the Baltic context. So there is plenty of issues on the table. I'm absolutely sure that we'll be able to handle most of those, probably not all of those, but to help handle these issues, we'll have absolutely excellent pool of experts today in all 4 panels. So not to delay any more the time, let's get down to business right now. And I wish to invite the panelists who are currently in the studio to take their seats here. So the panelists who are in the studio are welcome to take their seats. That is a seat for the moderator, so you're welcome to come over here. I would also like to welcome virtually the panelists, the other panelists that we have, the guests from abroad, who have been so kind to find a moment to join us. We are going to have expertise also from very important people from wind business in Europe. But allow me to spend a moment and invite the panelists to introduce themselves. So please, I'll perhaps start with Giles Dixon, CEO of Wind Europe, which is one of the key players in wind industry in Europe. Giles, the floor is yours for a short introduction.
Good morning, Reines. Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to be with you this morning. I am Giles Dixon, the CEO of Wind Europe. Wind Europe is the industry association for wind energy in Europe, the whole value chain. The members include the turbine manufacturers, the supply chain players, wind farm developers and big utilities and many others. And we advocate for the expansion of wind energy across all of Europe, both onshore and offshore. We engage governments and other stakeholders to ensure we have the right policies and legal framework in place to support the expansion of wind energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Giles. Next, I would like to move to Marianne Beck-Hassel. Marianne, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Reines, and good morning, everyone. My name is Marianne Hassel. I am a regulatory advisor at Ørsted, which, as I hope you all know, is the world's leading developer of offshore wind. So I currently lead Ørsted's regulatory activities in Latvia and the Baltics. And as Kadri Simpson was so kind to mention, we have this week actually announced our entry into Latvia and the Baltic region, and we're very excited about that. So very happy to be here today and look forward to speaking with you all some more.
Right, thank you. Let me now switch over to the studio, and Andris Vanaks, please tell about yourself shortly.
I'm Andris Vanaks. I'm representing Wind Energy Association in Latvia, and I'm proud to organize this event together with Danish Embassy in Latvia and other partners. And I'm really excited of this opportunity. And let's hope this conference will help to go from targets to implementation phase.
Thank you, Andris. Let's move on. Eddie Šaicāns.
Yes, thank you, Reinis. Good morning, everyone. I think it's a great pleasure to be here and discuss such an important topic which covers all renewable sector and especially the wind energy. My name is Eddie Šaicāns and I'm working for Ministry of Economics of Republic of Latvia, and currently I'm holding the Deputy State Secretary position for energy issues. Therefore, all energy topics, which definitely includes also the wind, both onshore and offshore, as well as other renewables, are under my supervision here in Ministry. I'm looking forward for a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Eddie. And last but not least, Gatis Junkāns.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy that I'm invited to this event. I represent Latvian transmission system operator, and we too, as a transmission system operator, are ready to play a full role in developing system to accommodate larger volumes of renewable, including wind energy. So I'm very excited to be a part of this discussion.
Thank you. So with this very short introduction of the participants of the panel, let's move down to the content of the panel. We are very well aware that Latvia, in the context of the Baltic states, is slightly lagging behind its neighbors to the south and to the north. Estonia has installed quite significant capacities of wind power. Lithuania has installed even more, and Latvia is in the middle, like a gray zone without wind. So apparently we might think that there is no wind in Latvia, but probably that's not really true. So wind is everywhere, and while there will be changes between night and day, the air will cool and heat up, there will be movement of air, so we are going to have wind as long as the earth is turning. So I think there are great prospects for harvesting this energy indeed. So switching back to Latvia, I think also the TSO has done a great job over the last 10 years within the Baltic Energy Market Interconnection Plan to install extra capacities of transmission lines. So apparently many things have been done to prepare the stage for more renewables to come in the future. So let's try to combine the knowledge that we have globally and in Europe from industry representatives and from local authorities and representatives of those institutions which play a key role in making wind really work. So with these introductory words, I'd like to go to the first question of the panel, which will be a more general one, and I expect very short answers from three panelists here. I will address this question to Eddie Šaicāns, Giles Dixon, and Andris Vanaks. So the question is, why is wind energy relevant today at all? Convince me. So Eddie, maybe I'll begin with you.
Thank you, Reinis, for a great question. Actually, it's really important to give such an answer, and I think that there will be no one answer for all of this, for one answer for this question. But actually, if you look on the global perspective, and it's clear that climate neutrality is not a desire. Actually, it's actually the Europe has declares a clear pathway where we are going, and that the 2050 is clear that we should be climate neutral. And Latvia is one of the member states, and actually we are quite ambitious on all these goals, have committed to be the climate neutral as well. Therefore, if you look on the perspective, it's a long-term goal, but if you look on the shorter one, then definitely, of course, we have some of policy documents in place in Latvia which foresees what is our aims and what are our goals and targets where we need to move. And especially one important for us, it's a National Energy and Climate Plan, which foresees that what is the targets we are moving forward. And definitely without the renewables, it's not possible to reach all these goals. And if you look on the potential possibilities in the renewable sector, it's definitely wind energy has a lot of advantages, and which explains why it's one of the fastest growing energy sources in the world. And from my perspective, I can just mention 4 main points why I think the wind energy is necessary in the future.
Do you think this is maybe this you can get back to these extended answer slightly later, or do you wish to summarize now?
I will summarize 4 main points. First
Great.
one, it's a clean fuel source because wind energy doesn't pollute the air. It's sustainable. Third one, which is really important, as mentioned also many times, it's a domestic source of energy, which increases our energy security. And the last but not least, wind energy is cost-effective technology now in place, which it's really economically affordable.
Great, thank you. I hope that the other panelists, like Giles and Andris, will have something to say to add to this. All right, Giles, let's switch over to you. So why is wind energy important at all?
Thank you very much, Renis. I agree with Edis that wind is clean. In addition to what Edis has said, wind has 0 water footprint, very important, and the industry has a very strong track record now of managing its impacts on environment and biodiversity. Wind is cheap, the cheapest form of new power generation in the north of Europe. It's good for the economy. Every new wind turbine that we build in Europe generates, on average, 10 million euros of economic activity. It is a local energy source. It's good for energy security, and it is increasingly secure and reliable.
Thank you, Giles. And finally, Andris, what is your answer?
Yes, electricity, as it was mentioned already by Edis and Giles, is the cheapest form of electricity form to be produced. It's not only cheapest, it's also renewable energy. It's not only renewable, this energy has no CO2 emissions. We are not burning any fuel, not fossil, not renewable fuel. That's also conditions of land in Latvia. We have excellent conditions to develop onshore 800 to 1,000 megawatts of new capacity next decade. But not only. Of course, wind is blowing in Latvia as well as a needed source of electricity. But not only. We have sea area available, and sea area potential is tremendous. It's overpassing our today's electricity consumption, and that's a really opening new area of thinking how to harvest this energy and how to consume this energy.
Thank you, Andris. So I think it's a great beginning. Although some of the key issues have been touched upon, there's plenty to dig into way deeper. So with this, I would like to address my next question to Gatis Junhans, member of the board of our electricity TSO. Gati, from the point of view of your organization, what are the preconditions for successful wind energy development? Do you think Latvia has it?
Yes, Reini. I think wind in general is quite attractive contributor to national renewable energy targets. And there are many aspects supporting that. First of all, as Renis mentioned in the beginning, wind, both onshore and offshore in Latvia and Baltic Sea region, is abundant. Secondly, wind energy is enjoying falling cost curves, and in many cases, wind energy is choice number 1 as a new generation capacity. Thirdly, Latvia, as well as Baltic region together, is integrated strongly with European energy market, which allows those wind producers in Latvia to have access to wider liquid energy market, which is important aspect when investing in production capacities. And lastly, but very important also, that the transmission grid in Latvia has been prepared to accommodate up to 1,000 megawatts of wind capacity already currently, and this capacity is substantially more than necessary to fulfill national renewable targets. But of course, there are also challenges, I would say rather long-term challenges. And from TSO perspective, I would name some of them. Firstly, system security, because a massive integration of variable renewable energy can, depending on a system, have an adverse effect on frequency stability, voltage stability. And if evolution of system is planned carefully, then these adverse effects can be avoided. And therefore, Latvian and Baltic transmission system operators are paying much of the focus on long-term system development to keep this security stable. Second factor is that Latvia, as well as Baltics together, is currently going through two major transitions in parallel. Baltic system is being prepared for desynchronization in 2025 from BRELL systems. That means that we, as a Baltic system, will disconnect 10 major interconnections with Russia unified power system. And this will change the way the system operates in the Baltic region. And second major transition is, of course, similarly like elsewhere in Europe, also Baltic generation is in a process of remaking the whole generation structure, with fossil-based power plants exiting the market and gradually being replaced with renewable. And those changes have to be taken into account in long-term planning of the system. And the last, say, long-term challenge that system operators have to take into account is system balancing, because massive integration of renewable energy, of course, requires greater system operational flexibility. And in order to achieve that, additional new flexibility services have to be available. Balancing capacity markets have to be developed, and this is something that is in a process in the Baltic region at the moment. And last is, of course, costs, because massive integration of wind, especially offshore wind in the long run, also will require investments in a transmission grid. And of course, the topic will be open how to cover these costs. Are those going to be covered by developers of wind generation, or are those be something that is put into transmission tariffs, or maybe there is a way to attract EU funding for that?
Thank you, Gatis. Indeed, socialization of costs of deploying new technologies or scaling up the capacity is always challenging from the point of view of costs, and whether those are going to be transmitted, well, in a way, over to the society, and will the energy user be the one who always pays in the end? So apparently energy users have to pay something. It's just a matter of how to organize how the circle of investment and getting back the investment is organized. So thank you, Gatis, for this introductory intervention. And I'd like to raise another issue. Gatis mentioned that there is plenty of, also Edis mentioned that there is plenty of space in the sea that can be used to harvest wind energy. We are all aware that in Europe, throughout Europe, there is plenty of offshore wind deployed already, and there are many more projects in the pipeline, some of them really massive projects of 400 and more megawatt capacity. There are even projects of building energy islands in the sea, which would produce wind energy and also harvest a bit of hydrogen from this wind energy to be able to store this energy for later use. So there are many things happening, but there is one important aspect, of course, to this. Again, we are returning back to costs. And this is where, Giles, I would like to address you. So do you think this is a dichotomy, like one or the other, offshore or onshore wind. So what is your point of view from the perspective of European Wind Energy Association?
Very simple. It makes sense for Latvia or any country to have both onshore and offshore wind. Today, Europe has 25 gigawatts of offshore wind. It has over 200 gigawatts of onshore wind. And today and for the rest of this decade, Europe will still be building more new onshore wind than offshore wind. There's no country in Europe, in fact, there's no country in the world that only has offshore wind and doesn't have onshore wind. And there's no country in Europe that is developing new offshore wind and not at the same time continuing to expand its onshore wind capacity. The two technologies are complementary. They're different, but they're complementary. And having both is good for diversity and balance in the energy mix. It helps system security. Gatis has just been talking about, to have both onshore wind and offshore wind. The other point is that from an industrial and an operational perspective, onshore and offshore wind, they feed off each other, they learn from each other. They have a common skills base, a common knowledge base, a common workforce, and each becomes more efficient and effective by having both working alongside each other in a country.
Yes, that was a very concise answer, but there is, again, we know that there are differences between the levelized cost of electricity for onshore and for offshore wind. What is your estimate? How much this differing LCO for offshore wind might actually hamper more rapid development of offshore wind?
So offshore wind, the costs have fallen spectacularly in the last 7 years. They have fallen spectacularly for onshore wind as well. But offshore wind is still slightly more expensive than onshore wind. And of course, the grid connection costs are more expensive for offshore wind than they are for onshore wind. Against that, offshore wind gives higher capacity factor than onshore wind. So new onshore wind farms deliver capacity factors of between 30 and 40%. New offshore wind farms, 50%. Okay?
All right.
Forgive me. Back to you, Rinus.
That's fine. Thanks. Thanks, Giles. And before going to the next question, I'd like to invite the conference viewers to engage in one interactive activity. The Slido application that was mentioned at the beginning, the slido.com, password WindWorks, offers to share your opinion on what should we go for in Latvia, offshore wind or onshore wind. This is in the context of what we just discussed with Giles. So you're welcome to submit your answers to the question, the most suitable form of wind energy for Latvia is onshore or offshore. Just two possible answers in this case. And we'll get back to the answers to this very simple Slido poll towards the end of the panel. All right. So thank you, Giles, for the moment being. And let's move back to the other important aspect, which is the regulatory framework for wind energy. It's, of course, possible to speak about investment and rapid development or slow development, but there has to be a framework within which this development has to take place or can or is able to take place. So, Andris, from your perspective as representative of local wind energy industry, do we have it? Do we have the framework here that is actually facilitating wind energy deployment? Maybe there are issues that you want to mention. The floor is yours.
Regulation environment is in development phase, and we see several very important milestones achieved already. So, National Energy and Climate Plan has been approved, and large-scale target for 2030 is set there. So 800 up to 1,000 megawatts of wind energy to be installed in Latvia to reach target in next decade. And that's really good. And we see in Europe there are a lot of negotiations and debates to update policies for 2030 to be more ambitious. And this policy target is in place, and we see active work is ongoing also in the Ministry of Economics as a leading ministry to implement this plan and energy targets. And work is ongoing, and we are in close cooperation as a partner to other stakeholders in this area. Nevertheless, we see that in practicalities, when we have actual projects in development phase, we are struggling still overpassing all barriers needed. Even when we have expert decisions approving possible construction in this particular area, taking into account all limitations and all possible impacts wind park needs to consider before it's constructed, we still have a lot of debate with society. Is it needed? Is it safe? We have still a lot of debates with local municipalities where in areas where wind parks can be developed. So political and regulation environment is in development, and we see it will continue quite well. Nevertheless, we need to get society and municipalities on board to be successful and to start really implementation during this year already. First parks going from development phase into construction phase.
Right, well, this is interesting. We are going to have a few more comments on the regulatory aspects of developing wind energy, and we are also going to have one dedicated panel, a panel dedicated to the public opinion and the social acceptance issues, which is one of the key barriers to wind energy, not only in Latvia but also in other countries around the world. So, but let's leave that for that particular panel. But thank you, Andris, for your introduction on the regulatory framework in Latvia right now. But Marianne, now I'm switching over to you. Of course, Latvia is not unique. Is not a unique case in terms of issues when it comes to the regulatory framework, which would be favorable or to the contrary, not favorable to developing wind energy. What is the experience from the industry's point of view? And you represent a really global player in this field. What are the most common challenges, most significant issues in this area? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, I think I'd like to start off by saying that, you know, as a global developer, when we look at markets and we look at the regulatory framework, we primarily look for two things. So the first thing that we need to see as a developer is a ambitious, specific, and long-term targets for the development of renewable energy, because this provides very strong demand signals for us, and it helps kind of keep our interest. And I think in this case, I think that in this sense, Latvia is not a challenging market for us. I think I want to mention here again that this memorandum of understanding that was signed between the Latvian and Estonian governments for the development of a hybrid offshore wind project is very innovative. It's one of the first in the world. And when realized, I mean, this could be the firstborn hybrid project to be commissioned. So I think that, from that perspective, we see very strong potential, very good ambitions, and really heading in the right direction. The second aspect that we then look for is obviously a very clear, a stable, and a transparent regulatory framework. And this is really important because this is what provides the right incentives for renewable build out, and it ultimately keeps investors like us at the table. And here I think that this is kind of the next step for Latvia essentially. And I think what the focus should be on is sort of creating clarity around those aspects, which will help developers like Ørsted make that final investment decision and move from the development phase to the construction phase. And I think, the kind of key things right off the bat that I think we would be looking for is, first of all, trying to provide greater clarity on the auction schedule this side of 2030, and also on the long-term pipeline. I think this will kind of result in more competitive projects today, because it means that, as a developer, when you can see more volume coming, you can spread your risk. So this is really important. I think the second one is getting more clarity around the preferred auction model and the award system. And I guess this is I speak obviously from an offshore perspective here, right? But this is really important for us. I think the third thing is to try to consider what kind of support schemes will be needed. I think, I think we think that, if we want to sort of achieve the kind of decarbonization that we need a massive amount of renewable build out of renewables. And the timing of supply and demand can be very difficult to predict. And I think we see this very much as a risk sharing exercise between developers and consumers. So looking at kind of what kind of subsidies or risk sharing mechanisms sort of will be needed to ensure that you get the build out fast enough to meet the decarbonization targets. And then I think there's obviously, a bunch of other things which are way more specific. I mean, grid connection points, environment and permitting requirements, all these kind of more these processes that obviously the more you can simplify them and provide clarity on this, that makes it easier from our perspective.
Oh, thank you. I think, yes, you just cast some light on the most significant challenges. Obviously, the markets are diverse, and probably still not one situation is absolutely unique and exclusive. But even though the general overall political framework might be a bit shaky, still there are opportunities to explore, like in the case of Latvia, for example. Okay, thank you, Marianne, for the moment being, and I'll move over to the next question for Edis. Panelists already mentioned that Latvia has high targets in the National Energy and Climate Plan for wind energy, so 800 megawatts, perhaps even more. And these targets have to be reached within a relatively short period of time. Edis, do you think 800 megawatts of wind capacity is realistic by 2030? What needs to be done to get there?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's always very interesting to discuss on these ambitions and the level of ambitions, what are expressed. And of course, the answer for this question, I think it's twofold. If you look on the current capacities installed in Latvia, we know it's about 70 megawatts. And if you look on the targets, it's 800 megawatts. It looks like it's quite ambitious targets. But if you look from second perspective, if you look on the table how much permits we have issued and how much are the projects which are in the phase of development studies here now in Latvia, then we see that there is more than 1,000 megawatts onshore only. And if you look on such a perspective, in addition to the offshore potential wind parks in the sea, then we see that 800 megawatts is not realistic, but it's, I could say, we could raise our ambitions. And at the moment when we discussed on this National Energy and Climate Plan targets, of course, it was really important discussion with all stakeholders. What is these levels? And we agreed on 800s, but now we see all these developments which are going now in the potential development of projects are showing us that we see that the 800 megawatts is quite realistic. And of course, to implement all of these projects, what I mentioned of this permitting process, there is a lot of points which should be done. And one was mentioned by Andris. It's a legal framework which is in place in Latvia. Definitely, we need to improvement there, but I think that the cooperation with all stakeholders are really good now in Latvian side. And I think the huge step forward is that currently we are working with quite big amendments in our energy law, which will make such a legal framework, which will be much clarify all these processes and how all these renewable energy projects could be developed. I think it's a really huge step forward. Definitely, we are working also with Estonians on this offshore wind project, common wind project, and definitely we see that there is some outcomes under discussions which should be improved in our legislation. And we are, with our team, we are working really keen on all these topics, and of course, we are open for discussions with stakeholders, with business societies, and with associations. And in Latvia, I think we have quite a good cooperation with associations, and we are listening to them because they are the experts in the potential sphere and what should be improved. And one thing what also was mentioned is this public acceptance of the current projects. And here, I think the right solution, in my understanding, is that if we talk more with our society, we also educate themselves, because the question here is always why we need in our backyards, why it's not somewhere far. But I think the discussion and talk with our society is a way where we need to move forward. And at the moment when our society will be educated enough that the green energy and the wind energy is not something wrong, but it's good, and it gives benefits not only for society but for the whole country as well, I think that we will move forward with that. And these topics, I think it's not easy them also solve only with the amendments in legislation. I think it's also work with the public, with educating the public, and make some I don't know advertisements explaining what is this energy source. And I think that yes, the short answer to the question, I think that 800 megawatts, which is mentioned in our National Energy and Climate Plan, is quite realistic. And I think we are on a track to achieve it, and I think it's a good way forward for us. And we of course take a note for all necessary amendments and barriers what we have in Latvia, and therefore I think it's really good to get in discussion also with such a global players like Ørsted. We are in discussion what are the best practices also in other countries, and of course definitely we will take in account and we amend our legislation basis to accommodate to fulfill such goals which are mentioned in our policy papers.
Thank you, Eddie. So this is absolutely optimistic view on things, and I somehow like your answer here. And let's hope that the plan actually is implemented and we can enjoy plenty of electricity for competitive price well within 10 years from now. So let us hope that things will be there and the industry will be interested and the local communities will be more engaged and all the factors will be there. All right, so moving to the last mandatory question, as I call them, of the panel session before moving into a more live debate and questions and answers. I want to ask the question to Andris as a head of the Latvian Wind Energy Association. From the industry's point of view, what is your long-term view on things? So how big is the potential really? Eddie's of course already highlighted some things, but from the industry point of view, how much wind? 2,000 megawatts? 3,000?
Reinis, the potential is higher than we can consume. So, and the question is how to electrify different sectors and how to consume this renewable electricity. And this is really a good challenge. For instance, if you are buying electrical car, it would have low sense to drive it and fuel this car with electricity in Poland, for instance, where majority of electricity is still produced from coal. But if you fuel electrical car by renewable energy, and today in Latvia we have 45–50% of electricity in system renewable on an annual basis, then by developing 800 megawatts up to 2030, we will have maybe 80% of renewable electricity in the system. And we have two cornerstones of it in 2030, hydropower plants, 35%, and 40% of wind energy. That's where Denmark is today, and up to 2030, Denmark will be producing more than consuming and will be exporting electricity. And that's a question, how to electrify different sectors. Transport sector, most challenging and with largest part of fossil fuel consumption. It's all imported fuels. And it's easy task, how to switch heating to renewables. So substituting natural gas randomly used in Latvia as a heating source, but it has low temperature potential. It's easy with existing solutions to convert solutions to renewable. And by having renewable electricity and using it for consumption, we will have double positive impact. And that's how it will go to 2030. And of course, it's just a precondition to go climate neutral. And in Latvia, we have all conditions to be leaders in the region, because we are, let's say, with high share of renewable energy today already. And for us, for Latvians, to be climate neutral is more easy task than for Estonia, for instance, where still they have historically based energy system, electricity on shale oil and electricity production, and their challenge is much more higher, and it will cost double what we need in Latvia to spend for climate issues.
It's good that at least in one thing we are, I'm joking, it's the usual jokes about how successful Estonians are and we are not so successful. So thank you, Andris. I think you cast a really interesting perspective for the industry and development of the industry. So with this, we have covered the so-called mandatory questions, and I'd like to go into a more lively debate. And I just want to mention that there are plenty of questions coming in through questions and answers on Slido, and some of the questions are more related to other panels, and I will save those for later for asking the panelists from other panels. But one, of course, issue here, one question which appears again and again among quite many questions that the conference viewers have submitted is, do we need to subsidize wind energy? I don't know, Giles, you have an overview of how the situation is in Europe. Do you see that subsidies are still needed for wind energy to be deployed?
Thank you for the question. Most of Europe has moved away from subsidizing wind energy towards stabilizing the revenues of wind farms. And the best way of doing this is with so-called contracts for difference. And the way it works is that governments run an auction, the wind farm developers, Ørsted and other companies bid in to that auction. They say, we will run this wind farm if you guarantee us, let us say, €50 a megawatt hour income for the first 15 years. If the market price is €40, then the government will pay €10 difference. If the market price is €60, then the wind farm developer pays that €10 difference back to the government. So the contract works both ways. It makes it cheap for governments because they're paying out sometimes, but they're getting paid back sometimes as well. And crucially, it reduces the total costs of the wind farm, because when you have a perspective of stable revenues, which these contracts for differences offer, you go to the banks and you can borrow project finance, debt for your wind farm to support the big capital investment you've got to make. You can borrow debt at cheap rates. If you don't have that perspective of stable revenues, it's much more expensive to raise your finance for the wind farm, and that makes the wind farm in total much more expensive over the course of its lifetime, nearly twice as expensive as it is when you have a contract difference.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for this. I'd also like to ask the same question to some of our panelists. I'm not sure who might be willing to answer that. Both Andris can actually comment on that. So is it really, I mean, wind energy, is it a myth that it can be cheaper? It can actually make electricity cheaper for the consumer?
That's an actual situation with recent developments of projects. we see recent auctions by near Latvia governments. For instance, in Finland, last auction was a couple of years ago, and it was a final auction, because afterwards, in that auction, there were 3 to 4 euros extra payment for wind farms in a competition basis awarded, only if market prices is dropping below certain level of electricity price, and it was, I think, below 35. Only then subsidy, small add on it, 3 to 4 euros was agreed to be paid by government. But in Lithuania, we see projects ongoing, and there were no subsidies for the projects. And these projects were selected also on competition basis in auction, and there were no any cheaper application or any cheaper technology offered. And that's really, it is cheapest source of electricity. And we don't need to debate about that actual situation already. And I would like to refer to previous question to Giles about subsidies as well. For wind energy, we are not buying any fuel to fuel the plant to produce electricity. Largest cost of building plant, largest cost for long-term perspective in the future, that's capital cost. And that's a question how to attract low-cost capital to deploy investments and attract in partnership model stakeholders to the projects. And that's really also examples from Finland where historical electricity utilities, they don't own wind parks today. Majority of owners are different investors whose capital rate is much lower than utility company investment return.
All right, thank
policy.
you. Thank you. All right. So there's so many questions coming in, actually, and I'll have to tell that the conference viewers, it will not be physically possible to answer all the questions. I'm trying to group those questions and to channel them to the panelists here during this panel, and as I said, also during the rest of the panels, according to the topic. But some of the questions that have come in refer, of course, to the situation where if you have rapidly increasing renewable energy, especially if it's variable energy in the system. So there have to be checks and balances, physical checks and balances basically in place for the system to be able to remain stable. Gati, maybe you can comment slightly or expand your previous answer on this. Do we have the ability to balance this incoming variable electricity in the future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's when we look on a longer run, I think it's important that regulation looks at the solution as an integrated system. From integrated system perspective, there was already mentioned inclusion of other sectors, power sector, including wind generation, can help to decarbonize other sectors like transport sector, like heating sector. At the same time, by electrification of those transport sectors, heating sectors, they can also help to solve problems of power sector, like balancing, because those sectors can also participate in providing advanced flexibility services, as they can create additional demand for wind energy, which might again help to solve this demand and maybe even subsidy topic. So I think it's very important that already from now this including balancing is solved from a wider cross-sectoral system perspective. Then I think it is possible to add additional wind energy, even as Andris mentioned, on top of what current consumption demand level is.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think, yes, Andris, jump in. John, go ahead.
So we in Latvia, we are part of Nord Pool liquid electricity market. So, and market rules are in place, and wind energy, forecasting next day, day generation, hour by hour, our forecast is very precise. More than 95% precisity we have already today. So, and it leaves balancing need for not so huge part of energy. Nevertheless, there are development on this market ongoing to incorporate more and more volatile production for solar and wind into the system on market basis. And this idea, for instance, if we would like to have enormous projects in sea, it requires changes in Nord Pool electricity trading market. For instance, shortening the period of trading. Instead of 1 hour, maybe it's 15 minutes. And there are other market like tools how to trade electricity in imbalance moment. And it works very well, but if, of course, there will be continuation of market development for that. And Gatis mentioned as well, there we need also market liquidity for capacity and reserve capacities for electricity generation when the wind and sun is not shining and blowing.
Well, Gatis has a brief comment on that.
Yes, I wanted to just to add to what Andris mentioned. Augstsprieguma tīkls, Latvian TSO, together with TSOs in the neighboring countries, currently are working on next 3 to 4 year market development plan in order to increase this flexibility in the market in order to align this physical reality to the market. And essentially the market will allow closer dynamic trade, closer to real time. We will also convert market from planning and trading in 60-minute periods to 15-minute periods. And there will be also implementation of balancing reserve markets. All these will, of course, facilitate and help to integrate increasing volumes of renewable energy into the electricity market.
And here in Latvia, and it's not Latvia national question, because Nord Pool market is a we can call it already pan-European market, and we have entrance to this market with our TSO power lines. And that's not a local issue, it's a regional issue. And we are planning renewables also targets national level. Those targets has been discussed with neighboring countries. So to solve the task of decarbonizing together. And it's much cheaper then. And our connections to power line connections to Estonia and to Lithuania is really substantial and key element for wind park developments and being active participant in this market. And this market works very well also in Latvia during night time when the consumption of electricity is 70% from daytime, maybe even 60 lower. We are not producing at all any electricity in Latvia, let's say. And we are able to import all electricity in that moment. And we have impact of nuclear electricity from Nordic countries. We have impact from hydro, not only from Latvia Daugava River, but also huge impact from hydro in Nordics. And this is altogether excellent preconditions.
Thank you. I'll actually, thanks for this. I want to briefly jump back to the opportunity of using our experts who have joined the conference from distance. Marianne, there is actually there are a couple of questions addressed specifically to you. One is on the potential gains and opportunities for the local researchers, engineers, maybe perhaps engineering students, once large-scale projects are being developed, and Ørsted is definitely a huge player. So what is your experience in this respect? How much is it actually possible to engage the local know-how, local engineers in developing such projects? Maybe you can briefly share your point of view.
Yeah, of course, and that's a super relevant question. So as that we have a long history of working with local stakeholders where we are. And I think at this point in time, in terms of our specific project, it's a bit too early to say, how that will be. I know that's a bit of a boring answer, but but we don't even know if we will have the site yet. So all of that is to be determined. But I think that generally speaking, we do always work with the local stakeholders present, and we always try to find ways to make sure that we get the best outcome for the communities where we are and for the projects which we develop and build.
Right. So in theory, there should be opportunity to engage local know-how as well.
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay, that's at least not a negative answer, not a negative connotation, but there might be possibility to do that. There are actually a number of questions which are quite market specific and very specific to the how the energy system operates. I'm afraid I will not be able to bring those up. I apologize to those who have posted the questions. It will simply be too much for the general audience, but these questions are here. We are aware that you have sent those in. We're closing, we are not closing the panel yet, but we are moving to the end of the panel. We have about 7 minutes left. There is actually, there are many questions asking whether there is going to be a recording of the conference. I have to get a hint if there is going to be a recording. So there's going to be a recording available of the conference. So those who cannot continue watching or want to get back to the conference contents later, yes, there will be a recording. There are also a number of comments saying that, well, this conference should have been broadcast either with translation or in Latvian, and it's a pity that some of the messages might not reach the local audience. The organizers are definitely aware of that, but I think it makes it much more dynamic if we can communicate in language which is available also to our foreign experts, as it would take much more time. We'll definitely look into possibility to cover some of the issues through publications based on this, on the outcomes or what we are discussing in the conference. So yes, good, excellent. If we look at the looking back to the Slido poll that was announced just after Giles' intervention on offshore and onshore wind, you can have a look at the screen. So. Slightly less than half of the answers are in favor of offshore wind. In favor of both solutions, there's slightly over 1/3, and there's 22% for onshore wind. So it's interesting. It will be interesting to see what lies below these answers. I have my suspicions, but maybe you want to briefly somehow comment this while we still have time. Very brief comments from the panelists.
It would be our pleasure to organize conference in presence of number of hundreds of audience with live translation in Latvian. Nevertheless, in this format where we have hybrid conference, we decided to go to English language only. But regarding poll, I see 81 vote, 42, 35, 21. That's reflecting probably.
Yeah, all right. Maybe this is actually the results getting back more to the panel on not in my backyard issue, where perhaps people are more reluctant to see onshore wind being developed because offshore wind is less physically visible near your home. Obviously, there are no homes at sea, so that might be my very quick reaction to that. I don't know if Eddies or Giles or Marianne want to kick in with a brief comment. Eddies first.
Yes, I can come in with a brief comment. Actually, I'm looking on these numbers from a different perspective. I think it shows that that the public awareness of the wind energy also onshore is rising, because 22% from 83 is quite a good number, and if you combine them with both answers, then it means that I think it's it's opinion of public, but the question is which is most suitable, and the public is saying, from my perspective, what for me is the better ones. And if we will combine these answers on this poll, also what was discussed in the panel about the costs and so on, I think the numbers maybe will be a little bit different. But actually, from my perspective, I see on these numbers, and they are not, they are quite optimistic, and I really trust that our public awareness is rising, and in one of the moments we will face the stage when our public will be ready to agree on the renewables energy and as well as onshore wind also in the...
Oh, thank you. Yes. Giles, do you have a comment on this? Oh, the results are somehow leveling out.
Yes, an observation on onshore wind and public support. In other countries in Europe, it is absolutely normal for onshore wind farms to pay taxes to the local municipal government or to make other forms of payments to the local community. Now, I understand this is not happening at the moment in Latvia. It would be quite normal that it should happen. In Spain, for example, the wind farms pay around 4 to 5 euros per megawatt hour to the local municipal governments on average for every unit that they generate. And this is a very important way of facilitating local municipal buy-in from local politicians for the local wind farm and increasing the support for among the local communities as well. By the way, Wind Europe, the main developers of onshore wind farms around Europe are all members of Wind Europe, and we have guidance for them, the do's and don'ts on how to engage local communities from the very earliest stages of developing an onshore wind farm. And they follow this guidance. Most of it is common sense, but it's very important that developers engage communities at a very early stage, explain to them what the wind farm is all about and how they will benefit from it, both socially and economically.
Great comment from you, Giles. Thanks. With your answer, you're actually jumping slightly ahead of the schedule to panel number 3 on Not in My Backyard to Yes in My Backyard. So we'll probably have a very interesting debate during that panel. But for the moment being, thank you, Giles. And Marianne, do you have some sort of observation regarding the results?
Yeah, I think I can perhaps just, well, I think maybe I should start by saying I cannot actually see the screen in front of me, but I'm very happy to hear that that there's people in favor of building out both, because I think we will need both to reach our decarbonization targets. And as I mentioned earlier, we really see such a big potential. And I think with these things, kind of as Giles was mentioning, that I mean, as a developer, we meet these concerns everywhere. We're present around the world, and you know, we always engage in these dialogues. And I think oftentimes it's about, you know, putting it in the bigger picture and understanding sort of the benefits to society, and that, you know, there will always be people who have differing opinions, but it's about finding a solution that works for everybody. You know. And I think with wind, you often have, you know, as Giles mentioned, you have way more coexistence than you might have otherwise. So I think it's very positive.
Well, thank you. I think with this, we have actually we have to conclude this panel, as we have spent our time for this panel. So I'd like to say many thanks to all the panelists in the studio and also behind the screen on the other end of the wireless connection here. So to summarize, wind is good. We need wind. Wind has huge potential. There are issues, but we can definitely deal with the issues. Costs will be falling. People don't have to worry too much about solutions. There are always upcoming new and more humane and more environmentally friendly solutions, even for such technology as wind energy. So with this positive note, let me end this panel. Once again, thank you, everybody. And now we are going to have a short video before a very short technical break before returning to the second panel.
It's an endless power source for our energy-hungry present. It circulates the globe wild and free, leveling differences, maintaining balance. To harness the energy of the winds of the world, you need a solid foundation. One that is fast and economical to design, produce, transport, and install. In other words, optimized, so that you can start feeding energy into the grid as soon as possible with as low CO2 emissions as possible.